Okay, I think we can get started. My name is Elizabeth Pendergrass, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Function Points Over the Years. Before we get started, I'd like to make you all aware of a few technical items. All of you who are listening on the conference call are currently on mute, so to ask a question at any point during the webinar, just use the Q&A dialog box in the bottom of the WebEx screen. And Don will field as many of these questions as he has time for at the end of the webinar. And if he doesn't have time to get to your question, don't worry, he will respond to those via email after the webinar. And he will also share his contact information in case you have any additional questions. So I'll start by quickly introducing our presenter today, Don Beckett. Don has 18 years of experience in software estimation, measurement, and analysis. His responsibilities at QSM include research, consulting, and customer support. Don was an analyst and cover of the 2006 QSM Software Almanac and has contributed to Crosstalk, Software Tech News, and IFPUG. So without further ado, I will let Don get started.
Well, good morning, everyone. As Elizabeth said, I'm Don Beckett. I'd like to give you a little bit more background on myself and really how this presentation came into being. I have 30 years of experience as a programmer, analyst, estimator, all the things that Elizabeth said. Even a brief and unsuccessful attempt to be a project manager. After about 10 years as a programmer, I became kind of bored and frustrated with the whole activity. I found that I was encountering the same problem over and over again. And I wanted to look at a way of, getting to the root of these problems, and I think metrics, to me, seem to be a way of, empirically looking at things and finding out why they were happening. And using metrics and software, function points were an obvious choice because they are so widely used. Over the years, we've tried to solve the issues of software development, for schedules, for cost overrun, for defect, with any of a number of things. When I started, there was structured programming. We've gone through case tools, object-oriented development, CMMI, ERP products, outsourcing, service-oriented, and probably a bunch more that I've forgotten. But as Fred Brooks said, none of these have really completely delivered on their promise. They've all done something. They're all good things, but none of them has really gotten to the core of the issues around software. Now, where function points come into this analysis is they're widely used in parametric estimation and productivity, and best of all, we've got a wealth of data on them here at QSM. So I decided to look at our database and see what we could find out about optimal staffing strategies and optimal sizing strategies, because it turns out that how large a project is has a great impact on its productivity. What's the best schedule for a project? And what's normal productivity for different types of projects? So I wanted to look at all of these things with now, we've got a very large database, and I wanted to look at the things you see down there in the bottom. And what I did was I extracted all of the projects that had completed since the year 2000, function point projects, and normalized the collection boundaries around projects that had all of the effort and schedule from the beginning of analysis up until implementation into production. Projects come in different flavors. Some of them are just development, some are full life cycle, and it's really not fair to compare one with the other. So I wanted to normalize the boundaries. We called out the suspect projects. One of the fields in our database is a confidence indicator. So anything that had a low confidence indicator, that was immediately cut out. And we limited the collection to flavors. And for all of the analysis here, everything is done on unadjusted function points. I'd like to add, in addition to the 2,231 projects collected since 2000, I also took a quick look at 869 projects from the 1990s, because there are a couple of trends over time analyses that I did. So we'll see those later. There were, in the sample of projects, there were 20 countries presented. I know Europe's not a country. And I was very surprised that I did not see India there, because we know that a lot of the development in the last decade are done in India. I think there's two reasons for this. The first being that many of the projects that are done in India are perhaps owned by in North America or Europe. So they were getting credit for actual work that was being done in India. The second reason is that the largest Indian system integrators, Tata, Infosys, Satyam, are unfortunately not companies of which we have data. So love to have it, we don't. So that's the way it was. So looking at all of this data, all of these projects together, what's a typical software project look like? Overwhelmingly, a typical project size and function points is a business IT project. I know function points can be used to count telecommunications, real-time. I think there's case studies in the IFPUG website for that, but they are, what we have are overwhelmingly business IT projects, which are projects with lots of I/O and data storage, which is a sweet spot for what we count in function points. The median size of the projects we had was 160 unadjusted function points, not terribly large. The schedule, median schedule, around 7 months. Median effort, 22 person months, around 3,500 person hours. An average staff of 2.3 full-time equivalents over the life of the project. You translate that into a cost, you can supply your own labor rate. I use $75 an hour. It comes to around $262,000 for the labor cost for your median-sized function point project. And 13% of the effort of these projects was spent in the high-level design analysis. Two things here we go back to later are the median size and this 13% of effort, because it turns out the size and the amount of effort spent in analysis and design have a huge impact on productivity. Here's the size distribution of the project. I apologize that all of the buckets aren't the same size, but if they were, there'd be one huge column to the left and a whole bunch of little ones to the right. But as you can see, half of the projects are virtually 150 function points or less. And by the time you get up to 500 to 1,000 function points, there are fewer in that group than there are in 151 to 200 function points. So, by and large, the projects are not terribly large. Looking at a distribution, you'll notice that the really big projects, the ones over 2,000 function points, they're only % of the projects we have in our sample, yet they account for 17% of the total effort that we have within the sample. So that's probably why those big projects get so much attention. They're expensive. They're important. They're very highly visible. I know in IFPUG, in the function point practice, we have 3 different types of function point counts: the application count, the development count, and the enhancement count. The QSM base is focused on projects, so the application count would not be there. And we've divided the projects into categories based on the amount of new functionality that they have. It turns out that the project type here is important in productivity, that there's what is normal for say a minor enhancement would not be normal for new development. We say major and minor enhancements, really it's not the significance nor the size of the project, it's really how much new functionality as opposed to modified functionality is in there. In fact, the minor enhancements in our sample tend to be larger projects than the major enhancements. This slide is really a summary of just all of the different things you can find out about the different project types. They vary in size, the amount of effort, the normal number of defects. I had, instead of median defects, had put a defect density per point there because new development and major enhancement are about the same, and the others have much higher defect rates per function point. So you'll notice that 75% of the projects are enhancements, while only a fourth or a fifth as many are new development. Looking at productivity of the projects, you'll notice that the larger a project is, the higher the productivity in function points per person month, or hours per function point. You choose your measure. I thought this was counterintuitive. I always thought that smaller projects should be more effective, more higher productivity. The data say otherwise. It's step by step. As the larger in size, the productivity in function points increases. At QSM, we use a different productivity measure. We call it the productivity index. And the real difference in productivity index from function points per person month is that it takes into account the time frame in which the software is developed. Nonetheless, you'll notice the trend with the productivity index is really the same one that we saw with function points per person month. As the project gets larger, the PI, or productivity index, increases. So these measures are confirming each other. So why are large projects more productive? The data say they are, but why are they? And this is speculation on my part, and I really invite you to give some thought. One of the things that I thought, well, these projects are probably higher visibility, make and break careers. They make and break budgets too. As such, they possibly have better leadership, more skilled resources, and even if they don't have more skilled resources, they probably have more dedicated resources. And that in itself is an efficiency. A person or resources that are split between projects are inherently less effective than ones that are dedicated to one project. And the question I would call out is, are there scalability issues with smaller projects? Our software development lifecycle methodologies seem to be geared principally to larger projects. I think the Agile people would certainly agree with this. An inch-and-a-half thick lifecycle methodology on a 50 function point project. So are the methods for using lifecycle, are they really counterproductive for smaller projects? And I just throw that open as a question. However, large projects, as Capers Jones and others have told us, they're more likely to be canceled. The bigger they are, the more likely they are to be canceled. And since productivity is only calculated from completed projects, is this really a self-select example? The large projects are, by definition, just the good ones, while small projects that are not terribly effective, aren't doing too well, they may be allowed to complete more frequently. It's an open question. I just wanted to see, how much effort is normal for different sizes of of projects. So there are projects under 10 person months of effort, 21% of the project. So a lot of our projects are very, they tend to have the highest productivity rate and function points per person month, and be fairly small projects. So the more efficiently you're using labor, which is to be expected, the more productive in function points per person month you will be. Looked at the different project types that we have and looked at what's normal effort for them. Now, new development projects have an average effort almost the same as minor enhancements. However, they are also tend to be twice as large as minor enhancements, so they're really quite a bit less effective. The various categories are particularly useful in estimation because the profiles of what's normal for a new development project is going to be different from a major enhancement or a minor enhancement. And when we estimate or look at analyze productivity and stuff, we want to keep the limit our analysis to projects that are similar. The effort schedule distribution, you can see most projects are between 3 and about 10 months. I think we don't see too many projects larger than a year because it's very hard to get funding approved for anything over a year. We tend to work with years. So most of the projects are 70% of them 9 months, overwhelming majority within a year, and the sweet spot somewhere between 3 and 10 months for them. I think this is probably the most important slide in this presentation. I did a regression through projects having, with schedule versus size, and my tool was nice enough to calculate the variance from normal for each project in the whole 2,231 sample. So I sorted them based on the variance from average, from the most relaxed schedule, which would have negative variance, to the have positive variance, to the compressed ones, which have a negative variance, and then divided all this sample into half standard deviation categories, and within each one of those categories, I measured the median function points per person month. And as you can see, the more relaxed the schedule is, the more productive the project is. It just goes in stair-step fashion down from 29 for projects that have a relaxed schedule, 2 standard deviations greater than average, to less, to 2 function points per staff month for those that have a compressed schedule, 2 standard deviations below average. Now, it's obviously not practical to put all of our projects 2 standard deviations above average in schedule, but I would like to suggest that if you look right in the middle line, that projects that have a half standard deviation compressed so have a productivity of 6 function points per staff month. With just a little relaxation of schedule, they have 8 function points per staff month. That's a productivity increase of a third, 33%. Now, what does that really mean in schedule? Well, for a project that's 6 or 7 months, we're talking a week or 2. It's not very significant. This is usually within management discretion. So, really as a best practice, if you can relax the schedule just modestly and plan for it that way. I'm not talking adding a schedule on at the end of the project when you realize you're not going to make your deadline. But if you plan that in, there is a significant productivity benefit and also a quality. I looked at staffing for projects, and on the column on the right hand, I divided the projects into the size ranges that you see. And within each size range, I sorted it based on the staff, from the least staff to the most staff. Divided these into quartiles and calculated the median productivity and the median staff for each quartile. Here I show the lowest staffing quartile and the highest staffing quartile. And the difference in productivity of these projects in each of these size ranges is pretty extreme, depending on if you use a high staffing strategy or a low staffing strategy. It varies from a difference of 2 to 1 up to a difference of 8 to 1, or the 500 to 1 function point project. The usual objection to this is, well, what's it going to do to my schedule? I don't have time to use this nice low staffing strategy. I've got to get the work done. So I'll pay the penalty. I'll put the extra people on this and get it done sooner. Well, let's see if that's true or not. Now, in this graph, I calculated the average median schedule within each of those size categories you saw on the last slide for each of the quartiles, from the least staffing to the one with the most. And as you can see, until you get to the largest projects, it's no difference whatsoever in impact on schedule, whether you're using a lean or a fat staffing profile. And when it does make a difference on the larger projects, the impact of using a large team is negative, decidedly negative. So I did the same thing, but used average instead of median. It's the same story. The columns vary a tiny bit, but it's the same story. Unless you're at the very largest project, it doesn't make much difference. There's very little impact on schedule, whether you use a lean or a fat staffing strategy. So the impact really of using large staffs on projects is you're going to spend more money and not reduce the schedule. A number of years ago, a couple of us at QSM did a study of the impact of time and effort spent in analysis and design on a number of things, on productivity, on schedule. And at the time, the center point, the average was 20% of effort was in analysis and design. That's decreased since then. I repeated the study based on our function point projects, and really with the same results. If you put 20% or more of your effort in analysis and design, your productivity is 28, 29% greater. If you get in our productivity index or in function points per staff month, the project will complete sooner. It will require less effort. The staffing actually is somewhat normal because there's a slight difference in size. The projects that use more than 20% analysis design effort tend to be a little larger, so that kind of negates out the difference in staff. The defects look about the same. However, those are the ones for the 20% analysis and design effort or larger projects, so they have higher quality. So time and effort spent in analysis and design pays big benefits. And it's nice to have metrics can talk to that. Looked at the slide, it's really almost anecdotal. I looked at software languages over the last 20 years, and of course it's on the companies that have contributed data to us. So it is kind of a self-selecting sample. We have a lot of data from a company that uses a certain development platform. That's reflected here, but it's interesting nonetheless. COBOL obviously has some staying power. It's still one of the most used languages. Development's not being done in it, but there's a huge installed base of software that has to be maintained. Java is a reflection of where most of the development's done on the web now. What I noticed looking at these projects was that you find a project that will have Java as its primary language and COBOL as the secondary language. So businesses are adapting their legacy systems to work on the web when they can. And there's some things you don't hear about anymore. Power Builder was really big in the late 1990s, and it's totally off the charts now. Looked at productivity over time, and the story is that it's decreased, measured in function points per person month or hours per function point. Since 2000, it's decreased from 9 down to 6 or so. Also reflected in the productivity index going down. Part of that can be attributed, I think, to the decrease in size, as we saw on earlier slides. As size increases, the productivity increases. I think there's and that is that we're making use of more reusable components. Which you don't get really credit for developing those in function points, but when you get credit, you can take advantage of the functionality that's there. And there are a lot of products such as package implementations where you get this tremendous amount of functionality, but the work that you're doing is mostly configuring them to work. And again, that's not a direct application of FPA. And of course, I mentioned the size is smaller. Now, open question, is the technical complexity of projects now greater than it was 20 years ago? And I haven't been a software developer for much for the last 20 years, so I'm putting that as an open question to you all. Schedule and efforts, really since our 1995 mark there, has been pretty steady, 6.67 to 7.13. It's just hasn't changed a whole lot. The amount of effort continues to decrease. We have smaller projects now. However, that's not been reflected in increased productivity. We're just putting less effort and making things smaller. Now, some recommendations for improvement, and I think these are borne out by data. If smaller projects could be bundled together, and they can't always, of course, but when they can, there is a big productivity gain to be achieved. So if you can bundle things into the 250 to 300 function point range, your productivity will be twice as high than those little projects under 100 function points. The biggest thing, relax the schedule. Plan it in. Don't add it on at the last moment. That doesn't work. But if you plan to have a more relaxed schedule, there's huge productivity improvements to be they're there for taking. You don't have to buy new tools. You don't have to invent new processes. You just have to give people time to do their work efficiently. And a third thing would be to staff sparingly. As we saw, the larger staffing profiles really did nothing to improve time to market. They certainly cost more, decreased productivity, and increased defects. And another bullet, which I don't have on here, would be spend more time in analysis and design. summarizing and say function points, they've been around a long time. They're going to be here a while, which is good for all of us. Many of us are CSPSs and occasionally earn part of our keep as function point counters. They're a good metric. Project size, as we've seen, has decreased from half as large as it was 20 years ago. Most projects are enhancements to major systems, and shouldn't our processes reflect the type of work that we're doing? Projects deliver faster and spend less effort than they did 20 years ago, and productivity has relentlessly dropped over the years. I'd like to leave you with the thought that the things that had the most impact on productivity and quality are things that management chooses. They determine how much functionality to include in a project, whether to use a lean or a fat staffing strategy, whether to have a aggressive schedule or to give the project the time that it needs, and whether to spend time up front getting the requirements right before beginning to do the work. Those are the things that we found, we identified that had the greatest impact on productivity and quality, and they're all in management's hands. And I'd like to thank you all very much, and I'm open for any and all questions you may have.
Okay, and just as a reminder to everyone, we will have a replay available. So if any part of it, or if you'd like to share it with anybody else, I'll send the link out early next week. So just to start, one was, why did QSM choose the development categories that it uses? Well,
the development categories were kind of determined based on looking at the data. We found that new development and the various enhancement categories were, they differed in their profiles. What was normal productivity, normal time to market. So the actual numbers on them were kind of arbitrary, but they've worked out very well for us. We can parse, especially with the company that develops estimation software. We found it very useful to, for this project, a new development project. Well, let me compare it with other new development. The degree of software that is modified seems to be really important in its productivity. Next question.
This is a good one. The advice in recent years is to break large projects down into smaller ones to make them more likely to succeed by whatever measure. Is the advice now to make projects bigger?
I don't know if it's advice, but the data seem to indicate that there is a benefit by grouping projects into larger size than these projects that are 50 or 100 function points. So I would say, yeah, where it's possible, where these can be effectively grouped together, it would be a good idea. But just looking at the data, that's what the data seem to say.
Why do you use the PI, the productivity index, as opposed to the industry standard hours per function point or function points per person month?
Well, hours per function point and function points per person month are ratio measures. They take something ratio between effort and size. And what we have found, and which I think is pretty evident in the presentation, is that the schedule has a huge, huge impact on how productive a project can be. The productivity index incorporates three major things: the size of the project, the amount of effort leveraged against it, and the time frame that it occurs. So in a sense, accounts for schedule, which function points per person month does not do. So that's why we use it.
Has QSM looked at whether any of the trends described in this presentation change if you look at projects measured in SLOC versus function points?
This analysis was just specifically on function point projects, so that's analysis waiting to be done. So the answer is no.
SLIM's default is SLOC. How do we convert to function points to find the PI for a specific project?
I understood it.
Okay, sure. SLIM's default is line code. How do we convert to function points to find the PI for a specific project?
I'm assuming in this case you have and I may be mistaken, the project has been sized in SLOC, not in function points, and the question is how do you convert that to function points to get the PI? What I would suggest if you don't have, if you're looking to determine a PI, just don't bother to convert it to function points. The only way you convert it to function points would be some sort of backfiring, and backfiring is usually not considered a good practice within ISPUG. PI can be calculated directly off of SLOC, so use them. If you have project size and function points, you would need to use gearing factors of your development languages to fit that into the equation to determine the productivity index.
Were differences between Agile and Waterfall examined? If so, what were the findings?
Not in this study. I have done research into that also, and which I think is on our website and can be shared. Initial studies would show Agile's pretty good, that it tends to use slightly higher staff. The PIs are higher, the time to market shorter, the overall effort's about the same, and the quality is as better. But it's not part of this study. It's a totally separate study.
You mentioned that PI includes in it an amount of effort. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. PI is calculated based on the schedule, size, the schedule and effort for the major development of the project, from beginning of low-level design really until implementation into production. So it would be the effort hours, effort months in that time frame. So it's all, it's your project effort in your main development activity is included in it.
Most of the slides use medians instead of averages. Why is that?
A lot of it was just to eliminate the impact of extreme outliers and to find the real measure of central tendency. Within any one of these categories, there's a great deal of variation. So it was a way of finding what's the center point of it without giving undue weight to things that were extremely large or extremely small.
On slide 15, where you showed how productivity decreases the more a schedule is compressed, what is the process you use to assemble that data?
It was a fun one, and it was partially manual, but what using one of our tools, I fit a regression line between a schedule versus size, with schedule on the x-axis, on the x-axis and schedule on the y-axis. I fit a regression line through there. The tool is nice enough to tell me how far each project varies from average. So I had this project, there's 2 standard deviations above, or this one's 2 below, and I sorted them by that, and then divided them into the individual categories. I then had matched them up with the productivity for each project and found the median productivity in each one of those size buckets. So I like that slide. It took a while to put together, not to put the slide together, but to get the data assembled.
I think that is the last question we have, unless anybody has any additional questions. Once again, Don has provided his contact information, and you can always follow up afterwards. Just so everyone's aware, I will send an email blast with a link to the webinar. One more quick question. Does that mean that your measure of how compressed a project is not provided by the project teams?
No, it's not. It's calculated. It's calculated based on those 2,231 projects with doing a regression through them, and then based on that, where the slope of that regression line, where it sits above it or below it. So there's nothing subjective about it at all.
Oh, one last one. How do your SLIM tools support function points?
Well, I would say maybe a quarter of the projects in our database, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, maybe function point projects. I was for many years estimator with a large systems integrator, and did use function points extensively. One of the really nice things about them from an estimation perspective, you could count them before the project was done. Slock, you can't do that. So what you have to do with our estimation tool, SLIM Estimate, you have to convert your function points into equivalent Slock using gearing factors. But we have on our website language gearing factors table, so it's something we revisit and update every couple of years. Is what's normal number of Slock per function point for a COBOL program or Java or C# or whatever. But they work very well with function points.
Yeah, so just a reminder, anyway, I will send a link with the replay. Please follow up with us with any additional questions. And thank you for joining us. And please be on the lookout for future webinars from QSM.
Thank you very much.